just so everybody's on board, we're glad to have Scott over. Good to see everybody. And what we're doing, we're in the middle of John, Gospel of John, getting ready to tackle Revelation. Okay. Now, I did this years ago, and I wonder if you were a part of that group.
Probably.
I think you might have been. I think you're the only one who was with me that early on that's here today. But anyway, it's a lot different from what it was back then. I'm getting bored out of it. I don't know about anybody else, but this is the 6th or 7th time I've done this study, and every time, what's the marvelous thing is I learn every time I do it. So today we're talking about the coming hour, I believe. This is getting serious. This is Jesus coming and dealing with Lazarus and the family, and all in preparation for going to Jerusalem. So we're going to start off with the Feast of Dedication. This is mentioned in John and nowhere else in the entire Bible except in the Apocrypha with First and Second Maccabees, First, Second, Third Maccabees. Let's just read through that. John's Gospel doesn't waste words. So why do they mention the feast? Why does it mention the Feast of Dedication? It also says it was winter, because the setting is essential to understand what Jesus is about to say and do. Although not dictated by Scripture, the Feast of Dedication, which is Hanukkah, today we would know it as that, has nevertheless become a powerful Jewish celebration. It holds in memory the rededication of the temple after it had been profaned by the Seleucids in 167. Yeah.
Permission to do wait for the host to give permission for his thing.
Okay.
So let's see. Let me try to join.
Disconnected last week, right?
Yeah, I was telling her about it.
Okay.
Thought we were set up.
He got a screenshot of his camera of his fan and sleeping somewhere. So I sent me a picture of it.
That's there.
Okay. See him is.
Let me see what Jan's up against. Because I don't think she's on either. Yeah, she says, is Zoom working?
They didn't create a new link, did
They
I have a link. Should I send them this link?
seven.
One of the things that also different from when you were here is he's added that magnanimous title at the bottom. His innocence. Yeah, every time it's a different adjective.
Well, I figure,
You know, we kind of need him, so we'll just give him latitude to let him call whatever he wants to call. So
that comes from.
It worked for me to join. I could.
Is it?
I don't know if this is a different
It may be a different link.
link.
I saw. I just sent him the deal. So let me know when you're in.
okay.
I have the specific meeting ID and password if you want to send him that.
I'll send it. I got it.
This is,
I got it. I tried to get it.
I'll tell them to try again from scratch.
okay. Should be the ID and then password.
Okay, leave that up for a second.
Okay.
Somebody finally like exit out and just restarted. Get racing. Does he need the phone number? Like if you,
No, yeah, that part's the ID. So they need that.
On the website, it shows a different passcode in it.
We usually don't have these issues, Scott. Sorry to pull everything back.
that's your phone number? What, do I need that number to send me?
Yes.
Yeah, just send it to Jan, see if she can get on.
No, it's the ID for the.
And what's that number called?
The meeting ID.
Since COVID, we've been doing the whatever you call it, PowerPoints, and found it hard to get away from because we got people who can't be here, and so we've been on it ever since. Let's go back and pick up. The point of this slide is that Hanukkah celebrates the events of 146, 167 to 46 in there when the Maccabees retook the temple away from the Seleucids. And but I really want to, I don't think we ever have a sense of what was going on. The 8-day festival begins on the 25th of Chislev, which is November, December, that month, and recalls the day the temple was desecrated. Antiochus IV, Epiphanes, launched yet another attack on Egypt, only this time the Egyptians were strengthened by a newfound ally, the Romans. Believing that the Jewish high priests, I missed one, ashamed and embarrassed, Antiochus Epiphanes was making his way back to Syria and with his tail between his legs, retreated in haste through Judea, and believing the Jewish high priest had turned traitor, needing a victory banner to carry back to his capital in Syria, Antiochus sacked Jerusalem, desecrated the temple by sacrificing pigs and slaughtering priests on the altar. He erected a statue dedicated to Zeus in the temple, and he outlawed the Jewish festivals, sacrifices, and religious practices. I mean, talk about in your face. Okay, somebody's on
Yes.
with the iPad. Okay, so Hanukkah is a family called the Hasmoneans, whose leader was Judas Maccabeus, gathered Jewish patriots, defeated the Syrians, recaptured the city, purified and reconsecrated the altar. And that's all in the Maccabees. Purification required 7 days, then an 8th day to celebrate. For a time, Hanukkah focused on the military victory, but by the end of the 1st century AD, it had lost its military emphasis. Under the Romans, any hint of an armed force was forbidden. Oh, good. So the celebration came to recall a small jar of consecrated oil that during purification burned miraculously for 8 days until new oil could be pressed and consecrated. Hence, this celebration uses the candlestick called the menorah with 8 branches and a center candle. Hanukkah is known as the Feast of Lights. What's interesting to me on this whole thing is the festival was set up to celebrate the army of Maccabean, the people rising up against the Syrians. And then the Romans took place and they said, we're not going to celebrate any uprisings, okay? And the whole nature of the festival changed to this idea of the miraculous use of the oil. Why does John mention Solomon's portico? Because Herod the Great had modified and enlarged the north, west, and south parts of the temple courtyard. But the oldest part on the east, where Solomon's portico was, dated back to the Maccabean times, or according to Josephus, to Solomon's times. That's probably a stretch because during the Babylonian captivity, you'll recall that the temple was destroyed, right? That was after Solomon's times. So it was historically authentic place to remember the desolation that took place in the Kidron Valley to the cemetery where the dead awaited the last day. John reminds us it was winter. Hanukkah occurs in the darkest time of the year when the earth dies. The east portico looks out at the Mount of Olives. The Mount of Olives is a cemetery. I don't know that a lot of us realize that. Mount of Olives today is an active cemetery, but has always been. The traditional way of dealing with funerals was on the Mount of Olives. You see lots of boxes, concrete boxes, and that's where the body was laid within 24 hours, no embalming or anything. Sealed. People come by and they don't bring flowers, they bring rocks. And you see these rocks all over the tops of these little sarcophagi. And after a period of time, and I forget what the amount of time is, 6 or 8 months, in that desert sun, dry air, that body disintegrates. Literally, it's a cremation, natural cremation. And then the family comes back and removes the top and scrapes the ashes together and the bones, whatever's left. And they have little coffins that they put those remains in. And those go to a storage place. So on the Mount of Olives, in the middle of winter, the earth dies. John's looking out at the Mount of Olives, the cemetery, and remembering the desecration of the temple. All of this is to create a sense of dread and awe of what's coming.
Larry?
Yeah.
Is that why Jews bring a stone to a loved one's grave today?
Yeah. Flowers die and go away, stones remain. Yeah. It's the tradition of Mount of Olives. Jesus was in Jerusalem. An argument took place between Jesus and the religious leaders, the Jews. When they say the Jews in the gospel, that's leaders. They were furious at Jesus's claim, the Father and I are one. And that's, according to John, the thing that tilted them. They were ready to stone him. Soon Jesus would be killed. So John has prepared us for the story of Lazarus. The setting is full of images of death. In other Gospels, Jairus' daughter in Matthew and Luke, and a widow's only son in Luke are raised from the dead by Jesus. None of that in John. And Lazarus isn't in any of the other Gospels. This is specific to him. John's account tells only of the raising of Lazarus, as if that traumatic event alone will be his witness. A mighty work done to the glory of God. In John's Gospel, Jesus did his first sign at a wedding in Cana, his final sign at a tomb near Bethany. Just as Jesus' mother Mary had believed he could do something at the wedding, so Mary and Martha believed Jesus could do something for Lazarus. When the sisters sent word that Lazarus was seriously ill, Jesus didn't go. His delay was deliberate. He picked the hour for the sign and the time for his approach. Similarly, he selected the time for his death. No one takes it, that is my life, from me, but I lay it down of my own accord. 4 days had passed since Lazarus had died. Mourners sang dirges. Mary and Martha felt grief's resentment and pain. That scenario, why did Jesus weep? John's Gospel says Jesus was deeply moved in spirit and in trouble. Was Jesus revealing his humanity? Showing how much he loved Lazarus? Showing the heart of God weeping when he wept? John's main concern usually is to show Jesus' divinity, the Son of God, rather than to show his humanity. Was Jesus weeping with disappointment that the crowd, even Mary and Martha, did not comprehend who he was, did not believe? Was Jesus sensing that to raise Lazarus would seal his own doom? Was he moved at the power of death, what the Apostle Paul called the last enemy? This is very interesting. Jesus did not pray to the Father for power to raise Lazarus, nor did he ask the Father to do it. He prayed a prayer of thanksgiving, grateful that the Father already had heard and answered him. The raising of Lazarus would be a sign that would cause many to believe. Where was Jesus standing? At Lazarus' tomb, Jesus was near the cemetery on the Mount of Olives. We're back there, where Jews have been buried for centuries, awaiting the last day, the day of resurrection. Where would Messiah appear? On the Mount of Olives. Of course, that high bluff overlooking Jerusalem from the east. Messiah would come from the east. When would Messiah appear? On the last day. Jews buried in the cemetery had carved on their tombstones a tav, that is the last letter of the Hebrew alphabet, to testify to their belief in the resurrection on the last day. So with symbols of death all around, Jesus proclaimed, I am the resurrection and the life. Not someday, but now. Not I will be, but I am. Martha had a someday perspective on resurrection. Jesus had a now perspective. In Jesus, resurrection life is already present. Only a few people seem to grasp this message before Jesus' resurrection. Peter, according to Matthew's gospel, professed, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." Of course, then he goes on to deny him. The Samaritan woman said, "He cannot be the Messiah, can he?" Now Martha gave her powerful testimony. "Yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, the one coming into the world." Lazarus proved an embarrassment to religious leaders. When the great crowd of the Jews learned that he was there, they came not only because of Jesus, but also because to see Lazarus, whom he had raised from the dead. So the chief priests planned to put Lazarus to death as well, since it was on account of him that many of the Jews were deserting and were believing in Jesus. More powerful the witness, more dramatic the gulf between belief and disbelief. Think about this. What's the difference between Jesus' resurrection and his raising of Lazarus? Are they the same?
Out there, but he raised Lazarus here.
It's an outward act. The fiction is from God.
For the Romans, whatever, you know.
But I think his resurrection.
The resurrection is from God.
Of God, but the Lazarus was something in real time that he acted upon.
And Lazarus was a resuscitation, not a resurrection. Lazarus is going to die again. He regained life, but life always has an end. So Lazarus will die again. The resurrection is beyond life.
Kind of like the centurion's daughter that he said she's just sleeping. It's like similar.
And so those others, the centurion's daughter, the all the ones that I mentioned. Yeah, the slave, all of those are resuscitations, enlivening of the body. The body's going to die again. Maybe more naturally next time.
Larry, how I want to sidetrack us, but how, when it was the Jews were living under the law, right? How did they view the afterlife? Here it implies, right, that they believed in the final day, right? But do they believe like they die, they get buried, and then someday in the future they all will be resurrected? How did they think, just to give us context, like that moment in time, how did they think about it versus?
I don't know.
Hey, you might want to mute yourself there, Theron.
Yeah.
Go on ahead and mute yourself. Can you do that? Gotcha. Thank you. The Jews are very split on afterlife. Pharisees believed in an afterlife. Sadducees did not. Scribes did not. Pharisees believed that, yes, on the last day, all would be raised to God. But what's going to happen in between a death and that last day, whenever that occurs? There's no indication of any thought about that. That's not part of their theology. They sacrifice, they want God's favor here and now. The law is here and now. It is for us to live as God created us to live. It is the framework around which God wants us to live. But what does that mean for after this life? And there's no indication of what that means, except there is indication that the Pharisees at the time of Jesus believed in resurrection. But others know. That really is one of the governing things, whether you are a Sadducee or a Pharisee, was your belief in the afterlife. That was a divider. Yeah, let's go next. John has a very interesting take on this meal with Mary and Martha, where Martha washes Jesus' feet with her ointment and then dries it with her hair. He's saying that this is directly after the resurrection of Lazarus. This meal at Mary and Martha's house, where Martha's in the kitchen, right? Mary's out there wasting her money and her time with Jesus. And John also couches that as a Passover meal. So let's go through that. Momentum now shifts to Passover, the Feast of Unleavened Bread. Once again, Jesus and disciples were in the home of Lazarus, Mary, and Martha in Bethany. Martha served a meal, but Mary did the unexpected. She had bought imported perfume. According to Judas, the cost of 300 denarii, about a day laborer's annual salary. Okay, that's the value he placed on it. Mary had been saving the perfume to anoint Jesus's body at his death. She had to believe Jesus when he said the hour has come. She anointed Jesus' feet with perfume and wiped them with her hair. The rich fragrance filled the house. Judas is not called a thief in any other gospel. He is in John. And he asks, why is this perfume not sold and the money given to the poor? Okay. Jesus' response seems threefold. First, the beauty of Mary's love gift should not have been ridiculed or spurned. Jesus, as God, gives extravagantly, so did Mary. We remember the wine at the wedding in Cana. 1,200, an extraordinary amount of wine. I could have opened a whole string of wine stores with all I want. The 12 baskets of bread gathered up after the feeding of the 5,000. All extravagant, extreme. So is Mary's gift of her perfume. Second, the reference to the poor by Judas seems feeble. Indeed, according to John's account, he was stealing from the common purse, which was used, to feed the poor. That's the purpose of it. Usually people who object to a lavish gift, a love gift, do not sacrifice to the poor, for the poor. Third, Mary recognized that everyone else either ignored or refused to acknowledge Jesus' hour had come. Jesus said as much, you always have the poor with you, but you do not always have me. If anyone was going to do him kindness, it had to be now. But most significantly, the anointing signaled the glorification, the love of God poured out on the cross. Mary's lavish gift graphically symbolized that Jesus' time had come. The pouring out of Jesus' immeasurable love. Yes, Jesus' time had come. The hour has come for the Son of Man to be glorified. Now my soul is troubled. And what should I say? Father, save me from this hour. No. It is for this reason that I have come to this hour. Father, glorify your name. It sum up the whole of the gospel message in that sentence. After that encounter, go into Palm Sunday. Jerusalem was like a tinderbox. Every Roman soldier was on alert. Religious pilgrims were pouring in from all over the world. Men, women, and children jostled shoulder to shoulder in the crowded streets. Even in faraway Rome, the emperor knew that unsubmissive Jews might rebel. And if they did, Passover would be the time. Zechariah, like other prophets of Israel, had a vision of the day when enemies would be stripped of their power and justice and peace would rule. Israel would no longer need chariots or war horses, for Messiah would come and Zion would rejoice greatly. Messiah would come as king, triumphant and victorious. But how would he come, this strange king of peace? He would come humbly, riding on a colt, the foal of the donkey. This is Zechariah back in the Old Testament, specifically laying out the groundwork for Jesus' entry. So he intentionally drew upon this peaceful, lowly image of Zechariah, for he was trying to reinterpret Messiah. He rode no white stallion like a general leading his troops, but came as a quiet teacher, riding a colt, his feet nearly touching the ground. Jesus did not want people to call him king because of the popular misconceptions that would create. But the crowd waved palm branches from Jericho. They shouted, Hosanna, King of Israel, as if he might overthrow the Roman occupation as Judas Maccabeus had defeated the armies of Antiochus. Only John's gospel mentions that the branches waved for Jesus were palm branches, the symbol of national unity and freedom. This thing just reeks of symbol. John thinks that's important for us to know. They are palm branches. Nowhere else does it say that. They wave branches, say the other gospels. Palm branches. The shouts were from the Hallelujah Psalms, the Egyptian Hallel, in which they remembered freedom from Egypt, victory over enemies, and entrance of their victorious king. Can you see why the Romans would be nervous? Commemorating victory over Egypt just by the words they say. The enthusiastic cries were the exact words of Psalm 118. Blessed is the one who comes in the name of the Lord. The crowd sensed the liturgical moment. Bind the festal procession with branches up to the horns of the altar, all the way into the temple. Perhaps with this prophet of great power, they could gain their long-sought liberty. They exploded with pent-up zeal. Yeah.
Related to Jesus' popularity and the rumors about him, and if it was like his movement in a way. I mean, because all this could have been celebrated that way the year before, or the year before.
And John has him going to Jerusalem 3 times. It could have been any one of those times.
But this
but the
one-
hour had not come.
Right, but this one in particular was.
Everything was coming together.
Okay,
Everything was about to explode. And as Jesus entered the city, the Jewish leaders must have recognized the potential for trouble. For messianic pretenders had sometimes raised up militant bands of followers only to incur Rome's wrath. In preceding years, the Roman army had put down several messianic insurrections. This was not an uncommon event. A few years earlier, the Romans had slaughtered 50,000 people, quashing one rebellion. Later, AD 70, Rome would crush the defiant Jews, destroying the temple forever and leaving Jerusalem in ruins. The religious leaders were supposed to keep civil order for the Roman authority. That's why they were given so much autonomy. Their role was to keep civil order so the Romans don't have to worry about it. No wonder when the multitudes were streaming into the city praising Jesus, the Pharisees commanded Jesus, "Teacher, order your disciples to stop." And Jesus answered, "I tell you, if these were silent, the stones would shout out." Perhaps Jesus was recalling the messianic image of Isaiah. For Zion's sake, I will not keep silent. Jesus, by word and deed, redefined Messiah, but the people did not understand. The Palm Sunday entrance, even without swords, confronted and challenged the religious community and the Roman Empire. Things were ready to happen. The question is, who would have the upper hand? What would happen? I heard this morning that there are now 8,000 National Guard people at the Capitol in preparation for the inauguration tomorrow to keep the peace. 8,000 soldiers. That's not unlike what it was here. The anticipation of what could be is just stunning. And something that I thought was in the last slide, but I didn't catch it. Again, about the palm branches. John is the only one that mentions the palm branches come from Jericho. Jericho is a city lined with palms. And the idea that the people would have palms from Jericho, there are no palm trees in Jerusalem, says there's a whole lot of preparation going on in anticipation of this entrance. Not just in the little band that's gathered in Mary and Martha's house, but in the area. People are taking those palm branches and shipping them up to Jerusalem for something. Okay. Jesus knew the hour had come. His death was imminent. Earlier visits to Jerusalem has caused conflict. Temple police had tried to arrest him. Jesus raising Lazarus resulted in many coming to believe in him. Greeks came to the festival wanting to see Jesus. That is, they're at the Jewish festival not because they want to celebrate. They're not Jews, they're Greeks. They've come for Jesus. This situation is breaking out of this is Jewish Messiah for the Jews. All of a sudden we're seeing that others are being attracted. Jesus raising Lazarus resulted in many coming to believe. Greeks coming to see Jesus. The Pharisees were frustrated. Look, the world, literally the cosmos, has gone after him. Jesus tried continually to interpret who he was. Earlier, when Nathanael, newly enlisted by Jesus, called him Son of God and King of Israel, Jesus challenged Nathanael's thinking. Said, "You will see greater things than these." When the 5,000 tried to force him to make him king after the miraculous feeding, Jesus withdrew into isolation. John even modifies the text from Zechariah. The prophet had written, "Rejoice greatly, O daughter Zion," but John's gospel replaces the opening phrase, "Do not be afraid, daughters of Zion." Where do we hear "do not be afraid" before this? For the birth, don't be afraid for the death. Don't be afraid is the first message that Mary heard, that the shepherds heard, that Elizabeth heard in John. The disciples were confused at this point. Can you imagine? The crowds were recklessly exuberant. The authorities sensed political crises. But Jesus used the moment to teach about his forthcoming death, what he called his hour of glory. He said to them, "Unless a grain of wheat falls into the earth and dies, it remains just a single grain. But if it dies, it bears much fruit." Jesus could have toned down his message, stopped healing, shown more respect for organized religion. Instead, he gave up his life in obedient self-sacrifice, dying to bring forth a rich harvest. Think how many blind people have been given sight, how many people have been forgiven, how many children have been blessed, how many hungry have been fed by the fruit, because the single grain fell into the earth. According to John's Gospel, Jesus' sacrificial death brings life abundant. Next week, power to bear fruit. Got a few minutes. What do you think? It's really easy for us at times to pull a verse from here and a verse from there, and make it mean something for us. But when you put the whole thing together, and the context creates a sense of what's coming, the anticipation. The resurrection becomes much more powerful. When we have even the disciples fighting over the wasting stuff on Jesus, come on, Judas. And you have the authorities wrestling with stuff, and you have him quoting Zechariah and Isaiah, and John is masterful as its storyteller. And it's interesting, the other gospels, they perform a function too. They tell stories. John is telling one story, and he only uses those elements that help build to that conclusion that he's going to present. And we're almost there, and it just kind of hangs in the air. Well, hello, Theron. He's asleep.
We're here.
You're there.
Larry? Larry,
Hey, there. I'm glad you finally got on. I don't think Jan did.
yeah, I apologize to the class and to you. The password number listed on the website is wrong. Thanks to
Oh.
Marilyn and to Danny we got on. So apologize for the confusion.
Don't worry about it. The confusion on this end is much greater. We want to make sure everybody has access, but obviously not everybody did. The website's wrong. Yeah. Okay. Can you make note of that?
I can probably tell Ellen.
Yeah. Anyway, what do you think of John? What's going on here?
Good. Okay, so someplace I was in, question about who actually wrote it. Think it was the same John. He asked for a question.
I would say yes, I think it's the same John. But I don't know but that's not the John of the disciple. It was written much later. It was written in the 80s and 90s. And Revelation was written in the 90s.
But the Gospel of John is written by the disciple, right?
No, what she's saying is the Gospel of John and the Revelation were written by the same person. I think so. The Gospel of John was the last gospel written. And I think I think it probably was the same person, but it wasn't the disciple. It was much too late for that. Paul's writings were in the 50s and 60s. And those were written before any gospel. Well, no,
Even Mark.
Mark was earlier than that. And the other two, Matthew and Luke, rely on Mark. Yeah. Yeah, in terms of sequence. And what's interesting to me is historically what's going on during this period. One of the things that's going on in the early church is a heresy. And dropping the name of it right now. Anyway, that denied that Christ was both human and divine. It was saying that Christ was either a good person that God used, or
This wasn't the Stoic.
not Stoicism, but can't think of that name. Anyway, the way I think about it is the heresy is that Jesus, okay, if Jesus was divine, he was the least divine image of God. And I kind of like he fell off the turnip truck. You know, he's the closest to earth was the least divine. There's a whole elevation of divinity. And actually that's Mormonism has that too. You know, that's why women always have to get married, because they go to the level of heaven where their husband ends up.
Well, then where do the angels fall?
I have no idea. In that theology,
It's above the angels.
they would probably say that Jesus was actually one of the angels,
He was that close to.
and he was the least one so he came to earth. Which is deny that he was God. Okay. He was a lesser God. And talked about this several times. I can't think of the word. Anyway, but that was going on in the church early on. I mean, you think about people following Jesus, learning all this, seeing the resurrection and all that, and trying to make sense of it. And some people went to extremes in one direction or another. And it was in that context that John finds a need to write a gospel. To me, that's the sense. And this, from the very beginning, he picks, you saw, he starts out with the cleansing of the temple. The other gospels have that. It's one of the very last things he does. He starts with the cleansing of the temple, then after the marriage in Cana. And so Cana is in North Galilee, and he cleanses the temple in Jerusalem. I mean, he's back and forth in John all over the place. But what he's doing is creating a sense of mystery. Who is this guy? And one of his last miracles is the raising of Lazarus before he's raised himself. And dealing with the world of that early church, just trying to show the reality of who Jesus is. So ideas, but he's putting it together as a whole complex personality that is in the end God. It's also a context for Revelation and why the beast and all this kind of stuff. So we'll get into that. But what else do you think? Scott, we're glad you're back.
Good to be back.
Hope you return again.
I will.
That's good. That's good.
Where are you gonna go from here? Like next week are you moving to Revelation quickly, or are you?
Yeah, we've got a couple more weeks before we get to Revelation.
And refresh my memory, first, second, third John, not the same author, not the same author. The names.
Those are pastoral letters. They're very different from this. And I would say that they are a different author. But we're going to deal with those and James and all before we get into Revelation as well. We'll have a couple of weeks on that. More specific. Well, let's close with joys and concerns.